Testing, testing. Hello? Hey everyone, it's Robbie from Gamers. Today we're going to do a little bit of paint in 40K. Let's talk about how to build a competitive list, all while getting our paintbrushes wet and getting our minis painted. Today I'll be working on some Pathfinders, but let's really focus on what we're here to talk about, and that is competitive list building for noobs. I think it's funny. I hope you find it funny as well. So, if you're starting to build a competitive list to play competitively, let me make sure this is working. There are three areas that you want to look at your list and make sure that really see if it aligns on what you want to do best, right? So, one of those areas is, of course, offensive output. Second is defense, or do you want to go balanced? So, when we're talking about offensive focus, this is usually any list that really hits hard but probably doesn't survive very long. We call them glass hammer lists, and they're a good focus, especially starting out, so that you can really focus on playing the mission, killing stuff, and hopefully overwhelming your opponent. The second area that you can do is you can go for more a defensive focus. And that is where you basically build an invincible list. That is a list that maybe doesn't have a lot of offensive output, but it'll be really tough for your opponent to destroy. We tend to see this with like Death Guard, where they play the long game, and Tau in 8th edition before the real changes. Now they're very offensive. Now they're more glass hammer, which is when you focus on offense and less on defense. We're going to look at some different types of lists, but I want you to think about it in terms of offensive output, defensive output, or a balance of both. A balance of both is typically what we call an all-comers list. I tend to stay away from these lists, and I'll tell you why, especially starting off. What it means to play an all-comers list is you have tools for every possible situation. The problem with that is that, one, it's not very adjusted to the meta. The meta is not all comers. You're not going to run into every single type of model, of unit, of really structure or format in a 3 or 6 game tournament. Now, that doesn't mean there's a benefit to building an all comers list. And I'll spend more time talking about an all comers list because what you're really doing is you're bringing some anti-tank, you're bringing some anti-horde, you're bringing some psychic or anti-psychic, you're bringing some mortal wounds. You're just bringing a mix of everything. What you're really doing is giving your opponent only a couple units to focus on killing, because to win in 40K, you got to play the mission and you got to destroy anything that will keep you from playing the mission. So if you have a list that's reliant on tanks, for example, then you need to destroy anything that can kill your tanks, right? So it's easy to prioritize targets. You destroy anything that can destroy tanks, and once they're all gone, at that point, you're scoring as many points as possible and trying to win the game. If it's a horde, it's the opposite. You are trying to kill anything that's really good at destroying horde. Sounds very basic, but there are lots of different ways to undo that. So those are 3 areas. There are 3 basic styles of lists. Glass hammer, what I call invincible lists that rely on feel no pains and invulnerable saves like Death Guard, and all comers list, where you kind of just bring a little bit of everything and just hope that you can win the mission. Now, there's a couple variations on this style of list too. You'll see some lists really built off of offensive power around mortal wounds. I call these mortal wounds spam lists. So what we're talking about here, and this focus is not working for me today. I will work on that for next time. What we're talking about in detail here are lists that are built to just deal a lot of mortal wounds, whether through smite and other psychic powers, or through weapons that deal mortal wounds. They work great against armies that have high invulnerable saves and high saves, but struggle against feel no pain or hordes, as you can imagine. Another list is one that's tailored to the mission. This is where you try to be as points efficient as possible so you don't give up too many secondaries and you can score as many secondaries or primary points as possible. Nothing wrong with that approach. You could also build what I call an overwhelming list. This is typically a swarm list where you just have so many bodies or so many vehicles, so many of one thing, that a lot of builds will just struggle with it. We've seen this with Monster Mash, with the Tyranids. I've built a Tau list that's similar to this, where I have so many Devilfish that if you can't deal with that many vehicles, it gives me an advantage. So that's the real high level of areas to think about. Sorry about seeing my hand. I'm just going through my list to make sure I don't miss anything. As we're going through here, think about those different considerations as we're talking about specific types of lists. Now, if you're not sure which type of list you want to build, I would first think about what army are you playing and what are their strengths. You want to play to the army's strengths. If you're playing to if you're just playing a style you like and the army isn't strong in it, you're already going to be starting off behind the 8 ball. So learn what your army strengths are, build to that, and play to that. So for example, the first type of list I want to focus on is a continuation we just talked about was a swarm list. This is where you really want to overwhelm the opponent with a ton of bodies, a ton of wounds. Typically, they don't have a high save, but if you build like a Space Marine swarm list, you can have a better save, so it's not necessarily true. But essentially saying, hey, here's a bunch of bodies, deal with them. I'm going to roll a lot of dice to hit you. You're going to have to roll a lot of dice to kill me, and we'll see who can survive 5 turns and win the mission. That style of list is really good, although I don't recommend it for beginners. It's really good to play, though, because for one, it plays the mission typically pretty well. It does tend to give you or make you more points efficient when it comes to using stratagems and buffs because you have a lot of large units. You're taking advantage essentially of the cheapest build with quantity. Now, the downsides to a swarm list as you're deciding to do it or not is it gives up secondaries pretty easily. And what I mean is if you have a lot of bodies, a lot of wounds, you're going to give up secondary points. And that can cost you the game. Another downside is it can take forever to master and play. I'm a big fan of Genestealer Cult. That's the army I like to play when I'm not playing Tau. And unfortunately, it's a very brainy army. And if you're not playing fast, you just have no chance of winning. Now, it also relies on weight of dice. So you're rolling a lot of dice just hoping to overwhelm big targets with quantity. But if they kill enough bodies, it doesn't matter how much dice it's going to be hard to find the quantity of dice you need to actually kill or destroy items, such as, knights can be difficult to kill for Swarmless, things like that. It's also tough for you to hide units and play the strategy behind the game, as the units are too big and there's too many models on the table to hide. That's why I like Genestealer Cult, because it actually gave you the ability to hide units underground, right? They could come in from deep strike, come in anywhere on the field, so you actually could start and play through the game without a lot of visibility to your units, and that's not even including the blips. But that's a swarm list. If you want to play with that, go for it. I don't recommend that, for a beginner list. What I would look more into is something a little easier to play, and that brings us to the next one. That's a gun line. A gun line is fairly easy to play. Basically, you form the army around buffs that you can stay in your deployment zone and essentially just kill key targets, destroy key units, and when you destroy them, then you can move out in turns 3, 4, and 5 to score secondaries and primary. You're essentially relying on all of your killing in turn 1 and 2, your alpha strike, if you will, to clear the field so that your weaker shooting units no longer have to shoot. They can just run out and complete the objective. That can be an advantage because it's easy to play. It's fast because you don't have a lot of moving, so that's great for a beginner, not having something that's fast to move. But it is tough to play the mission. You have to have great target prioritization, and you have to survive any blow. You will definitely have matchups that will just be really bad for you. And that can be bad. Or you could face another gun line and, in my opinion, have a very boring game, as both players try to get the other player to come out and get killed, which of course no one wants to, so it's going to be who blinks first. So that's gunline. I recommend that for beginner players if your army allows you to build that. So I'm thinking Eldar, I'm thinking Tau, even Genestealer Cult right now. There are ways to build. Imperial Guard is naturally good at that, and even Space Marines can be very good at a gun line. Once again, this does not mean that it will win a lot of games. It just means that it will get you through a game, you can learn through it, and it'll be effective. You will win some games. Another army build is an elite list, and that's really what I recommend for newer players that want to play competitively. And most armies can build an elite list, some better than others. This is where you really focus on monsters, vehicles, or very elite units that are very killy and hard to kill. So for me, I played it's this edition, but last year when I went to SoCal, I played a very elite army in Chaos Demons. So it was Keepers of Secrets, Lord of Change, very few models, Basically, if I lost a couple models early on, I lost the game. That's just how fast an elite army can lose. But if I played well, I was able to hide enough and strategically get them into position, they could easily overwhelm another army just because of quantity of attacks and the strength of attacks. I also find them easy to play, and it really forces you to use your brain to figure out what goes. It becomes more like chess instead of checkers. I feel like Swarmless are like checkers. You're just trying to overwhelm the board. Elite lists tend to be more like chess, where you're strategically trying to swap pieces. That way, you can try to end up with more points in the end than your opponent, which is, of course, how you win. But they also struggle with the mission, as they will be more limited in some of the points they can score, and they give up points typically. Especially with the list, like I said, like my Keepers of Secrets, which gave up psychic points as well as monster points. Another thing is called the vehicle parking lot list. This goes a little bit to what I said earlier in just overwhelming the opponent with specific designs. Now, keep in mind as I'm going through this, I'm going to miss some design builds. I'm glad to see in the comments, or go ahead and reach out to us with questions if there's any lists that you want to know more or that you know about that you want to share. But vehicle parking lot lists are basically exactly what they sound like. A bunch of vehicles. So many vehicles that you're essentially swarming the board instead of with infantry with vehicles. It's basically the elite version of a swarm list. This can be really good because a lot of list builds can't handle vehicles during certain forms of the meta. Now we're starting to move back into more vehicles, especially with monsters coming with Tyranids. Now might not be a good time for a vehicle swarm list because people start to bring those weapons again. And they're also prepared for swarms. So now is really a more balanced, at least meta, with trying to deal with Tyranids as they come out. Another challenge the vehicle list, of course, it gives up secondaries and it can struggle scoring points. But really, it's all on how you play it. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Another style of play you may have heard of or seen is MSU. So we bring a bunch of small units. Very good at playing the mission. Typically, if you can bring units of 5 or 6, they can complete the mission very well. They engage very well because you have a lot of units that you can sacrifice to get points. You can do actions very well. There's just so much you can do with them, but they do give grind them down off kind of easily, and they're very point efficient when it comes to stratagems. The stratagems really are more powerful the bigger the unit is, because even if you're paying an extra CP, you can only use one stratagem a turn. So having a list built around small units will make those stratagems less efficient, but that's okay because it plays the other parts of the mission better. So that's a variety of lists that you may choose to play when you're starting to play competitively. But keep in mind, the goal is not to win every game at first. The goal is to learn the rules. Your goal is to figure out what works well. So do what makes sense for you and your army. Pick something simple, something easy to do, and design it around 1 or 2 focuses, right? Do you want to be highly offensive? Is your goal to kill models, kill units, and grab objectives? And then build a glass hammer list, right? Build things that hit hard but die. If you want to build a list that just holds objectives, that's easy to do. Build things that are tough to kill. Think about Death Guard. Think about Riptides with Tau. Think about things that have an invulnerable save, high toughness, high save. That's why broadsides, I feel, are really good for Tau, is because it has a 2-up save naturally. You can give them, you can't give them a 4-up save, but you can give them shield drones, which then gives you a 4-up save. And you always have, for 1 CP, the ability to land those wounds onto a drone so that it doesn't have to take it. Now, there's some questions that came in this week in our Facebook group, so I'll jump to those. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and throw them in the chat. I'll be glad to answer them. Just sitting here painting as a group and talking 40K. So this question comes from Colin. When choosing units in competitive lists, do you look for offensive or defensive power? And I started talking about this, but I'll be honest with you, you're better off going with offense over defense. It will simplify the game, and it really focuses on you as the player picking the right target to kill, to remove from the table, and that's the game. You're in control. Defensive lists can be more powerful than offensive lists, but they're harder to play. Think about Richard Siegler playing the Tau list Back when Tau, quite honestly, sucked. Let's just be honest. Tau was not very good for most of this edition until they just got their codex. But Richard Siegler made it work. He made it work because he's a very smart player who knew how to trade pieces up. So when he lost a unit, he'd already taken something more valuable and he was able to play the mission. But to do that, you have to know everyone's army much better than they even know their own army. And there's a reason he didn't play it for long. For those of you that were following, he did play to win. I think he won a couple GTs with it, or he might have even only won one. And then he moved back to AdMac and Sisters and did his own thing. That's because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to play an army in that sense. Ricky, how do I make it look so easy? Is that painting or is that talking while painting? Because I most certainly am not the best painter in the world. Let me know. But that's a really good question. Unless you mean playing, I'd be glad to answer that as well. So I know there's a delay. You'll hear this in a little bit. Please clarify your question. So back to Colin's question, I would choose offensive power over defensive power, but your adjustments to play the mission, if you notice you're not winning games, will be to keep growing your ability to be more defensive. You want to balance a little bit of it in part of your army to absorb shots. All right, Ricky has a question from before. I know he's in the chat, but I saw him in Facebook. He sent this through. He said, how do you approach balance in a list? Is it better to fully commit to one offensive approach and mitigate it? My rule of thumb, especially early on, is, hey, just focus on one thing. Be great at what you're great at and let it overcome your flaws. Once again, the goal is not to win every game, it's to win more games than you lose. And to do that, build a powerful list in one key area. How do I make life look easy? I don't know if that's true. I appreciate that. I like to think that my life is easy, but it's not. I just make it look good. We all have tough lives. We all have challenges, but you just smile. You just be your best self every day. Paint your minis, roll some dice, make friends, and keep on 40K. But I appreciate that comment. Thank you so much, Ricky. And I hope that answered your question about approaching a list. I would not build a balanced list. You can build a balanced list when you're better at the game. But what you'll wind up doing is you'll still lean more offensively or defensively. I don't think you'll ever build a truly balanced list. And clearly, I am terrible at getting this focus, so thanks for your patience. All right, Matt has a question. Matt S. How do you get your favorite units into a competitive list? That's a dangerous question. Now, I know, Matt, what he means is, how do I fit Ghost Keels in a Tau list? Now, to be fair, we all have our favorite units, our favorite models. And if you love them that much, shoot, put them in your list. Who cares? Just understand it may make your list less efficient. So you have a choice. You can either build around that list where you try to take advantage of it. So Ghost Keels, for example, not a lot of offensive output, very good defensively. Something Tau actually do need. Having played against Tau with my Tau, if you're playing a mirror match, if you don't have good defense, you're going to get stomped. So the best offense against Tau, if you're playing a mirror match, is defense. I have found that you can weather the storm of Tau shooting. If you can, you win the game. Crisis suits are easy to kill. Riptides are not. Broadsides are somewhat easy to kill if you know how to kill them, right? You have to find a way to get rid of their drones and then go after them. So you either use a lot of small arms fire to force them to take it on their broadsides and hope that you can get them to fail a couple and then quickly switch to anti-tank so they have to take the wounds on that broadside, or the opposite. Get them to use their shield drones up first, then pour all the fire into it. But honestly, hey, Ghost Keels are great if you're outside. I think it's 18 inches or untargetable, or maybe it's 12. So they're really good at holding the backfield. They're really good at just being annoying for your opponent to destroy. And if you find a way to play that as part of the mission, then you've already run. You've already won. Ash had a great question. Ash said, what would some core things be to remember when building lists for different armies? Really, a couple things. How are you going to score points? So primary, secondary, and how are you going to prevent the opponent from scoring points, both primary and secondary? I start with primary. I think primary is the most important part of the mission. Now that they added those like second primary goals, it makes it even more challenging. But basically, if you could always control more objectives than your opponent, you win primary. It's that simple. And by controlling more, you're preventing them from controlling more. So having a way to take an objective from an opponent and hold an objective. It's okay to not hold an objective if you also prevent the other player from holding the objective. So how I did that with Tau, for example, is I would shoot them off the objective. Pretty easy. But Tau also struggle to hold the objective. That's why I use a lot of Devilfish. When it comes to like Chaos, using Keeper of Secrets and a Lord of Change, a lot of it's just offensive power. Kill them off the objective and say, come get me. You may have objective secure, but if you're stuck in combat with me in my turn, that's another chance for me to win, because with Slaanesh you could fight twice because you can fight again in the psychic phase. It's really a great play. Play the mission to win the game. That's what I say. So first start with primary. How are you going to win primary? And if you... how do I say this? Secondaries aren't very important as well, but start with primary. If you are new to the competitive world, just focus on the primary. Get great at that, and then look at the secondary once you get great at playing the primary. I'll leave it at that. Games are won and lost in the secondary, but like I said, your goal is to continue to improve, slowly but surely, in your performance in the mission itself. So I hope that answers your question, Ash. I have another question from Matt Y. This one's loaded. I took a lot of notes for this. This one is, so I had to do my research. Some of the stuff I make up, I won't lie, and some of the stuff I actually look up. So here we're in the actual research part of today's stream. How do you evaluate an army's capabilities with regards to secondaries? What we were just talking about, right? And how do you build a list with this in mind? This is a loaded question. If you are ready to focus on secondaries, which as I mentioned, I would wait. Maybe I should put this out of the way. I think this is the problem. Let's see. That's a little better. Maybe that was it. Maybe I got to get this out of the way too. All right. Hopefully that helped you all out. Hope you're painting something fun today. Let me know in the chat what you're painting. I'd love to hear. So I'm going to go through some of the secondaries and give you some tips. Keep in mind it's going to be very high level, but in general you can easily build a list to avoid most secondaries, but it could limit your choices in actually building the list. So keep that in mind. First thing you want to do is any secondary that you're giving up, you want to keep the opponent from scoring 10 points or less. That's usually the magic number. Some will say 7, some will say 9. If you struggle playing the primary or winning in primary, you need to limit secondary points. However, if you are great, your list is great, your style is great at playing primary, you can give up more points in the secondary. So keep that in mind. But here's a quick rundown. First of all, keep the tally around 10. Typically, there are 2 of 3 secondaries that your opponent will pick no matter what, regardless of your army build. So the third one, if you keep it under 10 and you can at least compete with the other ones, is pretty good. So let's see here. Assassinate. That one's usually pretty easy. Keep your number of characters down to 2 or 3. That will limit the score to 7 to 10 points if they take all your characters. Now, you can bring more characters if you're going to be safe with them. If you know, if I lose all 5 characters, I've already lost the game, then go ahead, bring 5 characters. But don't bring 5 characters that you're going to suicide into the other person's army, because that is just giving up 15 points for no good reason. And that's going to cost you the game. Bring it down, same thing. Do the total. With vehicles, I know it's either 1 point, 2 points, or 3 points based on wounds. Try to keep it at 10. 10 or less, you're okay. It's usually discouraging. Painting up some Tau, a ghost keel. Wow, that's exciting. I loved painting my ghost keels. Problem is, you only need 3, and I now have 3 all painted. So unfortunately, that chapter of my life has ended. I am now in the Fire Warrior Pathfinder stage because I for some reason never got around to painting my Pathfinders, to be honest with you, which is good, except that I want to change their heads. I want to change them to the new helmets in the new Pathfinders, but I haven't even started that yet. I got a tournament to get ready in 2 weeks, and so I got to get these guys painted before I even worry about kit bashing or adding new helmets. So that's where I'm at. Tower fun. So I mentioned bring it down. Oh, starting your scorpions. Very cool, Jeffrey. Awesome. Red scorpions. Oh, man. Power armor, my friend. That is really cool. Power armor is fun to paint. Titan Hunter's another secondary. I mean, you're only worried about that if you're bringing Titans. My rule of thumb is bring one Titan and that's it. Or go all in. Bring 5 Titans. Bring 4. Who cares? Bring a Knight Army. But at that point, it's okay to go to 15 because you're committing. You know, that's what I did with the Chaos Demon list. I knew I was going to give up max on, I think it was, hold on, where's the name of it? It's a psychic. Abhor the Witch. I'd give up 15 points. What do I care? I was committed. Do you know what I mean? It's either going to work or it's not. So you can give up more points if you're okay losing because of that reason, if it means you're going to have fun. And I was able to win 3 games out of 6, and that was my goal. So I consider that a win. All right, next one. No prisoners. This one's tougher. I try to avoid thinking about this one because typically if you bring 100 models, you're giving up 12 points. That's a lot. But if you lost 100 models, did you already lose the game? Or 100 wounds? So in my head, it's okay. Because if you lost 100 models, you probably lost the game anyway. So I think that one's a wash. But if you really are worried about penny pinching some of those points, consider having 69 total wounds or less in your non-monster, non-character, non-vehicle units and models. Let me switch to discussion because I don't feel like painting for a second. I just need a break. So 69 wounds for me is the magic number because you divide it by 10, and I'm pretty sure you round down. So 69 gives you 6 points, and then you get 1 point for getting over 49. So you're giving up 7 points. That's not a huge deal. And if you're at a game that right down to the wire is a close game and you lose all of your infantry, 7 points, if you still lose the game, it wasn't because of that. It was because of some other secondary. Maybe you picked a poor choice in secondary or not. Now, right now we're talking list building. So I'm going through all the secondaries and how you can adjust your list to it. But you can also build your list to score some of these points. But right now we're avoiding points here. We see this in Grind Them Down. This goes back to Elite List. Here, let me get back to painting because I got to get these done. I can't be procrastinating. So, Elite Lists tend to give up Grind It Down. Or Swarmless with a lot of small units. So you've got to be very careful with Grind Them Down. But that one's a matchup by matchup problem. So I tend to ignore that one as well in list building. But in the game, like right before the game, I will decide to use it if it makes sense to. These guys need a chance to go. Let's find something else to do. This looks like fun. All right, where was I? Grind them down. To the Last. To the Last is actually a really good one to build too. I've done this with Tau because, at least in the former, with this codex, maybe not as much. This iteration of Tau is very offensively strong. Although I think there are strong builds to build it more defensively. In fact, mine is kind of that. If you were to build more defensively, you can certainly do To the Last because you can pick 2 or 3 units that are your largest. Well, they have to be the 3 units that are your largest. Pick the Paint Through the Pain. Thanks, Jeffrey. I appreciate it. So, what was I saying? So, you have to pick the 3 most expensive units in your army. So by doing that, they need to be able to survive to the end of the game. So the trick for me to do that is typically pick like a Riptide or 2, like bring Riptides and max them out. And you can also pick expensive characters if I remember right, which is a good strategy as well. Things that you know that if you lost them, you lost the game anyway. Now, you're most likely going to lose one of the 3. But if you lose 2, that secondary wasn't good to build to. So that one is more how do you build your list to score those points, and you can do that. I've seen Death Guard do that really well. Like I mentioned earlier, Tau, pre-Codex Tau. Although I can easily see current Tau doing the same thing, 2 Riptides and an expensive commander, or Shadow Sun, and then do a bunch of MSU and small units. That might be really good for an infantry spam list if you want to add that as support. So that's an option for you. Now we're going to the psychic ones. Psychic ones are interesting. I like Abhor the Witch a lot. I think that's a very powerful secondary when you're playing psychic armies. So if you have the option to bring a psyker, but you don't really need it, it's not valuable to you, don't bring one. It's as easy as that. You know, you don't have to bring a psyker. Another thing you can do is by not bringing psychers, you also don't give it up. But if you do have to bring a psyker, bring as few as you need. Don't bring too many. That way they can't do Abhor the Witch against you. Because that's an easy secondary for some, especially non-psychic armies like Tau. That's an easy secondary to pick against you. I'm trying to go through this fast, trying to keep this entertaining. I know that a lot of information here, but we're just kind of chatting, kind of getting along, living our best life, painting red on these plasma rifles for my crisis suits. These are actually for broadsides, but they're going to go on my crisis suits because I already have them magnetized. Abhor the Witch, Warp Ritual. I don't like this one. I would avoid this one, but you can do this if you built a list to control the middle. Looking at Pierce the Veil, same idea. I don't like it. I wouldn't do it. That's the one where you have to do psychic actions in the opponent's deployment zone. Too difficult. Don't worry about it. Skip it. I'm not saying it's not good to pick once in a while, but I wouldn't build to it, and I certainly wouldn't pick it unless I absolutely had no other choice. Psychic Interrogation. That one's pretty good. But you have to have a list with so many psychic abilities that you don't mind stopping them from casting anything else to do it. Once again, that's up to you. I'm supposed to keep this in front so you can watch. Raise the Banners. I like that one. I'm okay with that, but you don't really have to build a list to it. That's really good for MSU. It's really good for if you have enough units that they could keep doing actions, and you could control at least 3 objectives for the entire game. I think that is worth considering. But now we're going more into theory. You don't really build to that. Investigate Signal, same idea. I don't like it. It reminds me of Warp Ritual. R&D you could build towards. For example, with Tau, you would do Vespids. You would bring them in, and they could deep strike and do RDP. For those who don't know, that's R&D, excuse me. All right, continuing to fast forward through. Hope everyone's enjoying their painting, getting a lot done. Skip deploy teleport homers. That'd just be just situational, but I would avoid that one. I don't like that one. Behind enemy lines, same thing. There are better options. I mean, if you build an aggressive list, sure, but if you're facing a gun line, it's not going to work. So I wouldn't build to it. Engage, you can definitely build to. You just build some throwaway units, small units, that you can easily sneak in, grab you points that you don't mind losing, but keep in mind this could give you grinds down. That's why it's a good thing that secondaries are secret, because they won't pick that because you picked it. They won't know. Last one, we'll talk about Stranglehold. Swarmless are great at this. Just controlling the board, controlling objectives, and you will get lots of points. So to kind of summarize, really, the whole point of this conversation, we talked about a lot, is that when we're talking about building your list to be competitive, you have to have a plan in how you're going to win the mission and most missions. You know what missions you're going into every tournament. They post them ahead of time. You know what it is. If it's a GT, they typically go in order from beginning to end. Otherwise, they may be sort of random. Knowing that, you can cater a list to those missions and have a game plan on which secondaries you typically would want to choose. That's what you're building your list to do. And as you play more games, what you'll notice is that you will lose some games. Why did you lose them? You know, I didn't have a tough enough unit, or gosh, if I had just picked this one unit for this situation, I could have, picked this secondary. Make the adjustment. Keep playtesting. In the end, to be a good competitive player, you just have to practice. You have to keep playing, keep giving it a shot, and you will do great. There is one last question I was going to ask, answer. Why so many demons? So this is my funny question for you to let you go before I leave. I honestly like Swarmless. I'll admit it. I like bringing a lot of bodies, and demons are pretty scary. So bringing a bunch of Demonettes and Keepers of Secrets just makes me happy because I can roll a lot of dice and they do a lot of damage and then they die because it's a glass hammer list. Well, hey, thank you so much for painting with me tonight. Hope you had a good time as well as I did. We'll catch you next time. Make it a great day.